All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are digging into a really provocative idea from our source material, the claim that ancient China is the control group for all of world mythology. And as you're about to see, this single idea could challenge pretty much everything we thought we knew about where our oldest stories really come from. So at the very heart of all of this is a puzzle that's bothered people for centuries. You've got cultures like the ancient Maya, the Sumerians, the Norse. I mean, these people were separated by huge oceans and thousands of years. And yet, when you look at their most basic, fundamental stories, they seem to be telling the same tale. A world-ending flood, powerful beings from the sky, an age of giants. You have to ask, how is that even possible? Well, for decades, academia has had two main answers on the table. The first one comes from psychology, the idea of Jung's collective unconscious. Basically, we all share the same deep-seated fears and hopes. So of course, flood myths pop up everywhere. Fear of drowning is just universal. The other answer is much simpler. Cultural diffusion. Stories travel. People trade, they migrate, they conquer, and they share their myths. One is about our shared minds, the other is about shared maps. But here's the thing. Both of those explanations have a potential blind spot. They work great for cultures we know had contact, or for myths that are kind of vague. But the source material we're looking at today poses a massive what if. What if there was a major civilization that was completely, totally isolated, and yet it preserved these exact same stories, not in some vague way, but in stunning, precise detail? What would that mean? So here's our game plan. We'll start with the big puzzle, then we'll introduce China as our unique control group. From there, we'll dive into the jaw-dropping parallels, a forbidden curriculum, a single creator god, and of course, a great flood. Then we're going to carefully look at the most contested physical evidence and wrap it all up with the one massive question this all leads to. So with all these incredible similarities in our oldest stories, we're really left with three possibilities. Are they just a weird byproduct of our psychology? Are they the result of stories getting passed around? Or, and this is the big one, could they be a common memory of something that actually happened? And that brings us to the core of this whole argument. The analysis we're exploring today puts ancient China on the stand as the ultimate test case. Why China? Well, it's all about its profound, documented, and incredibly long isolation from the ancient Near East, the place where so many of these key myths first got written down. And just look at this timeline. The scale we're talking about is just massive. The first Sumerian flood stories are being written down more than 2,000 years before Christ. The Shang dynasty gets its start in China around 1600 BC. The Book of Enoch, which is packed with details about divine beings and forbidden knowledge, is put together around 300 BC. But the Silk Road, the very first real, sustained contact between China and the West, that doesn't open until 13 BC. Think about that. That's almost 2,000 years of parallel, isolated development. So, if the diffusion theory is correct, you'd expect to find next to nothing in common between China and, say, the Book of Genesis. But the source material we're looking at argues that what you actually find is mind-blowing. Ancient Chinese records appear to preserve a 5-part pattern that is an exact mirror of the narrative from the Near East. Semi-divine teachers, one supreme creator god, a world-ending flood, physical evidence of giant humans, and even a truly bizarre astronomical record. Okay, let's start with that first parallel, because it's a wild one. The absolute oldest layer of Chinese myth talks about these figures called the Three Sovereigns. They were considered semi-divine beings who came down and taught humanity the arts of civilization. And this wasn't some vague, fuzzy wisdom. Oh no, it was a specific curriculum. And when you put the two traditions side by side, it's just stunning. In China, a being named Shen Nong taught agriculture and medicine. In the Book of Enoch, a being named Kazdejaya is condemned for teaching the exact same things. In China, Fuxi taught writing. In Enoch, a being named Penemu did. In China, Huangdi, the famous Yellow Emperor, taught astronomy and warfare. And in Enoch, the beings Barakiel and Azazel were called out for teaching astrology and how to make weapons. It's not just similar, it's the same list. And that right there is the crucial point. We're looking at the same core event, non-human beings giving humanity specific, game-changing technology. The only real difference is the moral spin. As the slide says, one tradition calls it a heroic cultural founding, while the other calls it a sinful transgression. The judgment is different, but the event being described appears to be identical. Okay, let's move on to the next set of parallels, because the pattern just keeps building.
Now we're looking at two of the heaviest hitters in all of ancient mythology, the nature of God and the memory of a great flood.
You see, in China's most ancient religious records, we're talking oracle bones from 1600 BC, we don't find a big, complicated family of gods. What we find is a single supreme god called Shangdi, which means emperor above. And here's the kicker. He was understood to be invisible. There were no statues of him, no idols. He was the unseen creator of all things.
Now, this totally challenges the standard textbook idea that all religions slowly evolve from believing in many gods to just one god. Here we have two completely separate ancient cultures, the early Hebrews and the early Chinese, and both of them seem to start with a belief in a single, invisible creator god that they made sacrifices to. The argument here is that this isn't parallel evolution. It's a shared primordial memory.
And then, of course, there's the flood. Chinese mythology has traditions that contain every single core element of the Genesis story. You've got a cosmic crime that results in a world-destroying flood. You have a chosen few, Nuwa and Fuxi, who survive in a floating vessel, in this case a gourd. Afterwards, they get a divine green light to repopulate the empty planet. And finally, a new world order begins under a hero, Yu the Great. The whole moral sequence, transgression, judgment, preservation, and a new start, is exactly the same.
All right, let's shift gears. We are now moving into the most debated, most controversial pieces of evidence that the source material brings up, and this is where we need to be really careful and intellectually honest about what's being claimed. So, at a 5,000-year-old archaeological site in China called Zhaojia, archaeologists unearthed a number of male skeletons, and their average height was 6 feet 3 inches. As you can see from the chart, that is dramatically taller than the average man in China today, let alone someone living 5,000 years ago with ancient nutrition. It is a genuine statistical anomaly. So let's be crystal clear about the framing here. The source is not screaming, "Aha, we found the Nephilim in China." Not at all. The argument is much more subtle. It's saying that this physical, archaeological data is consistent with a mythological framework that says there was a race of unusually large beings on the Earth before a great flood. And that brings us to what is, frankly, the most startling piece of contested evidence. This date range, 31 to 33 AD. This is the period most historians agree corresponds to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And, tucked away in the official court records of China's Han Dynasty, is an entry that is nothing short of remarkable. During an eclipse that occurred in this period, the imperial astronomer wrote this down. Yin and yang have mistakenly switched. The sins of all the people are now on one man. Pardon is proclaimed to all under heaven. A separate record from the same time, also about an eclipse, includes the line, "Man from heaven died."
Okay, wow. Before we go any further, it is absolutely essential that we put this in context. This kind of atonement language could just be a standard formula that Chinese emperors used during bad omens, like an eclipse. They often took ritual responsibility for things going wrong in the cosmos. So while the timing and the exact phrasing are incredible, this is not presented as a smoking gun. The source just urges us to note this record, its timing, and its language, without jumping to massive conclusions.
So we followed all these different threads, the divine teachers, the single creator God, the great flood, the giant skeletons, this mysterious eclipse. Where does that leave us? What does it all mean when you put it together? Here it is. This is the concluding argument from the source, stated at its absolute strongest. If China, the one civilization that was totally isolated, our control group, independently preserves this entire 5-part pattern, then the old explanations of shared psychology or cultural borrowing just don't seem to cut it anymore. A common historical origin, a shared memory of actual events that all of humanity carried with them, suddenly becomes the most logical explanation left on the table.
And this is the final question we're left to wrestle with. If China, the ultimate test case, remembers all of this in such vivid detail, without any way for those stories to have traveled there, then what does that imply about all the other cultures around the world who tell the same story? What does it really suggest about the origin of myth itself?